And hello again to another Perspectives chat. And this one is going to have a spacey magnetic theme about it. As you know, I've talked about the influence that cosmic events and occurrences have upon the Earth and the human condition. I've talked about this in the Safe Surfer video, and I've talked about it in terms of coronal mass injections, the plasma coming from the sun. I've been looking and researching more about plasma since then, and I was aware how that plasma was part of the makeup of the cosmos, and how plasma is very heavily part of the stars and our star, the sun. But I wasn't aware of just how dominant is plasma. And I've just finished reading a book by Robert Temple called A New Science of Heaven. And he was going through all the research and explaining how the universe that we are familiar with, is between 99 and up to 99.9% plasma. In other words, it's all plasma, more or less. And it's plasma energy, and in fact, materiality or atoms that create solidity, are in fact very rare in our cosmos. And therefore, organic life, which is created from atoms as we are, is a very rare phenomenon. And in fact, it's more likely that life is inorganic in the majority, because organic atomic life is a very, very, very minuscule percentage of the makeup of the cosmos. So I wasn't aware to the degree of how plasma is basically, this is a plasma universe. So of course, we are surrounded by plasma, and plasma is a part of the Northern Lights, Aurora Borealis, and the Southern Lights, Australis Borealis, forgive my pronunciation. And we have, of course, lightning strikes, which are plasma. And we use plasma in some of our electronics, in some of our neon lighting and plasma televisions. So actually, when the sun has a CME, coronal mass ejection, we are being bombarded by plasma. And the Earth has been protected through its magnetic shielding. So therefore, a lot of the energy of the plasma, and also any kind of effects or radiation and energy from the cosmos doesn't get through, majority doesn't get through the magnetic shielding, so life on this Earth is protected. We are literally within a bubble, a physical protective magnetic bubble, as well as a perceptual reality bubble. So what would happen if we were not shielded? If we were open to be bombarded by solar and galactic radiation, including high degrees of plasma, what would happen? Well, looking up at, I've been looking up this recently, so there may be another video coming on this theme of cosmic radiation and the effects on this planet. But looking up magnetic shield, we know, well, if you're aware of this theme, then you have heard in the news items about the magnetic shield weakening on the Earth. And there's been news reports for years now about the magnetic north shifting on the north of the Earth, and because they had to realign some of their instruments, because the magnetic north has been moving away from its prior position. Of course, that's very important when we use it for navigation and aviation and other things. So, and we know that there's been some strange behavior with a lot of the birds and mammals and sea life that use the magnetic orientation for their navigation. So when we hear these very sad stories about whales and being stranded on beaches and you know kind of anomalies in the migration of birds, these are affected by the magnetic streams and the magnetic lines across the planet. But looking into the magnetic shield, you've probably come across similar reports about its weakening, but I have never heard anything specific about what degree. So looking this up, now the information I've received, and it's been verified, and I'll present a YouTube link below to a YouTube site that talks about these findings. It's called Suspicious Observers. And they talk about how between the 1800s and 1900s, the magnetic shield of the Earth was started to decrease. And it was decreasing by 5% per century. So 5% per century is not a kind of fast amount, not a rapid deceleration. But since recently, in recent decades, that has accelerated. And in the 2000s, for example, it's been decreasing by 5% per decade. So we've gone from 5% per century to 5% per decade. Now, if it's decreasing 5% per decade on top of the previous decrease per century, then how many decades do we have left if this trend continues, whereby we will not have a magnetic shield? That's another thing to consider. But let us consider that the magnetic shield is decreasing at an accelerating rate, 5% per decade. And yet, since 2015, NASA, which has been putting out this information, has stopped putting out the information. And perhaps we can only suspect that they found the information alarming and didn't want to alarm anybody else, and decided that they would put a stop on this, because if you keep putting out 5% per decade, then some people are eventually going to prick up their ears and see something is not right here. So since 2015, there's not been any updates on that decrease. So the question to ask, since we've had this rapid decrease, have there been any notable effects? Well, if you're following geophysical events, like this YouTube site, Suspicious Observers, then there's been, of course, erratic climatic shifts, which can be viewed as being aligned with the decrease of the magnetic shielding. So although we have the climate agenda on one hand, and we have to be careful about that because we know that that is a certain agenda, we also have climatic effects on the other hand, which are very likely to be affected by the increase in solar and cosmic radiation and impacts coming through a weakened magnetic shielding. But I don't wish to focus on any climatic events right now. I want to focus on, which is usually my focus, the human condition. Has it affected the human being? And I came across an interesting video from this site where they talk about how, and they use, again, scientific papers to show that with a weakened magnetic field, there can be physical, cognitive, psychological, emotional effects on the human being. And these effects can be an increase in stress, in emotional instability, anxiety, and a fluctuation and decrease in human cognition. And that's significant. Now, especially in these times, because events across the earth are already adding to the amount of human stress, anxiety, emotional instability, affecting the human cognition. These are from impacts, physical impacts from the conditions of life, global conditions, but also local conditions. Just trying to get by, as we say, trying to make a life for ourselves, it's increasingly stressful. But if we have to add on top of that there could be what we may see as invisible or unrecognized or unperceived impacts coming through from the off-planet because of the weakening of the magnetic field, then this is something to take into account and be aware of, that we may have mood swings, cognitive fluctuations, which are being affected by conditions that we are unaware of and that we have not perceived until now, or we're not generally aware of, should I say. So so there can be solar weather, solar magnetics, and sun plasma impacts that create further stressful factors. And there's two videos from this site of Suspicious Observers, and I'll put them below in the notes, the links to what they call World Going Crazy, Stress and Endurance, and the unseen factor. And it is the unseen factor. We are not aware of that. So don't just listen to me. Do your own research and look at these sites and other sites, and you will see you can make up your own mind. But I do feel that we should be aware of these factors, that we may be getting some mind fog and emotional instabilities from unseen factors. But interestingly, when I was looking at these videos, I also glanced at the notes, and there were a lot of people who were sharing their experiences and talking about they've witnessed an increase in depression, depression within themselves, depression within people they know, erratic behavior, an increase in erratic behavior from people they know closely that they cannot explain. And perhaps these magnetic disturbances can explain these increase in erratic behaviors. And if we just glance across the mainstream news, apologies, sometimes we have to glance at the mainstream news just to keep an eye on what's being reported by them. A lot of it, of course, is negative and of course, but there seems to be, everywhere we look, erratic behavior, just kind of animalistic behavior. But this was interesting. This is one response, quite a long one, that someone posted, and I thought it's worth sharing this. So this is a response that someone put into this video about magnetic effects. And I'll read it after a sip. Okay, this person says, I have been a private music teacher for 37 years and am a retired professional musician. Generally, the students who find their way through my door are pretty high-functioning kids. Over the last 3 years, I have witnessed some stark changes in the kids' cognition. At first, I attributed it to having to wear masks, lack of oxygen, and general stress from lockdowns and societal polarizations. As time progressed, the hemispherical processing issues became downright alarming. Students who had been playing for 10 years would insist they were doing something with their left hand when it was actually their right hand. I would say, no, play with your left hand, and the student would pound in frustration with his right hand and say, I am. The worst part was when I pointed out, no, that's your right hand, they would freeze, pause, glitch, and it was clear they were having trouble understanding they had just got mixed up. They mix up a treble clef and bass clef, or all of a sudden their left hand will play what their right hand is supposed to be doing. Or they will suddenly skip over 2 bars of music, like a hole in their train of thought, and they do not notice. These are not normal mistakes. Normal mistakes are wrong notes, sloppy rhythm, wrong fingerings, uneven touch, or lack of cleanliness in technique. Flipping information from one hemisphere to the other after playing for 10 years is not. There is some correlation between the earthly magnetic electrical changes that we are all experience. I have been very careful to make sure my observations are not influenced by confirmation bias, which is why I have not said anything publicly until this moment. I am not a religious person, but this situation brings new meaning to the phrase end times madness. All I can do is still try to bring the gift and joy of music to them for as long as I can. And that's quite telling, because yes, you can make sloppy mistakes, but after being a musician or a student or musician for many years, you actually have a hemispheric shift from not realizing that your hands are swapping over. That's something drastic. Now, that's just one example. There are other notes about people talking about depression and an increase of anxiety, etc. So I think it's worth bearing in mind and being aware, because we have to bring these things out in the open, that I've talked about stepping back from being entangled in the spectacle of the absurd, the theatre of external events and the geopolitics and all this. I've talked about stepping back and creating an energetic kind of detachment, so we have a place of balance. We also need to be cognitively aware of our condition, and we have to be aware if we feel that our emotions are fluctuating, or if our psychological state is fluctuating. We may be sitting at home not having any contact with external events, but we still feel these fluctuations. If so, we have to realize that maybe they are impacted by unseen factors, such as incoming magnetic shifts and solar radiation. We can't do much about that. I'm not talking about living in an aluminium covered cave. What I'm saying is just being aware and observing, stepping back within ourselves and observing any fluctuation through the human body and the body apparatus, the mind, emotions. The more that we are aware of this, the more that we can step back and observe behavior while not getting drawn into the behavior. If we feel a psychological fluctuation, we don't have to start acting erratic. We can just step back and observe it and take time out. So I will speak more about this, because there is a bigger picture on these cosmic shifts that are happening, and that will be for another video. But this is just one I wish to bring attention to and put it on the table. It may be a factor, it may not be, but like anything, if something crosses my mind, I share it, and it's something to put on the table. So let us keep a clarity in these times ahead. Cheers.